Welcome again to the CSEA Public Sector Local and Unit Meeting Chairperson Training video series. This presentation is the third in the series of videos created to assist you with preparing for and running the election of officers for your bargaining unit. Before you're listening to this presentation, you should have listened to the election training introductory video as well as the video about nominations and applications. This is Leslie Perrin, Deputy Counsel in the CSEA Legal Department and Staff Advisor to the Statewide Election Committee. Today we'll be discussing what happens once the application period has ended. This segment of the training is relevant for locals and units where you have at least one race for office. In other words, not all of your positions to be elected were filled without opposition at the close of your nomination period. You have at least one office for which there's more than one candidate. So in this segment, we'll cover what needs to happen when you have to have balloting or voting before your process will be complete and you can report your results. We'll cover how to conduct drawing for position on the ballot, how to draft ballots and instructions, proper campaigning, meet the candidates' events, and the role of the election committee in those parts of the process. The next step where you have a race will be to conduct drawing for position on the ballot. As a side note, the final election-related list of members will be mailed to you in late April. That list is your list of members who are eligible to vote in your election, your voter eligibility list or VEL. Remember, each list is different. You received a list earlier of members eligible to run for office, your candidate eligibility list. Each list is based on a different membership cutoff date and is used for a different step in the election process. We'll discuss how to use the VEL list later. So, when you notified folks that they were successful or unsuccessful in becoming candidates, you should have notified them at the time and place you'll be conducting drawing for position on the ballot and explained that they're entitled to be present to participate or observe the process and may send a proxy if they're unable to attend themselves. Due to the pandemic, you may have opted to conduct the drawing virtually, such as via Zoom, during which the candidates can join a virtual meeting and observe the committee draw for each candidate. Ballot position is the order in which candidates' names will appear on the ballot. When slates are involved in your process, the entire slate will appear on the same line on the ballot. Some candidates feel very strongly that there is an advantage to being first or last on the ballot. The process of drawing for position is all about making the determination of who appears in what order fair. Candidates, or their designated proxies, who must also be members in good standing and should provide written permission from the candidate, may attend to observe or participate in the drawing. You should make and keep a log of observers on a form like the N14 you see here. This slide shows samples, and there are samples in your booklet at pages N15 and N16 that show how to determine the order of drawing for position with slates and independent candidates, which means people who are not on slates, as well as with only independent candidates. Drawing for position will take place in alphabetical order based on the candidates' last names, starting with the highest office. Where there are slates, the entire slate is drawn once based on the alphabetical order of the last name of the candidate for president. If there is no candidate for president on a slate, such as when there has been an involuntary withdrawal from a slate, you'll use the last name of the slate candidate running for the next highest office as the basis for alphabetizing the draw order. If you have only individual candidates, no slates at all, you'll place numbered pieces of paper in a hat or a box or an envelope or another similar device. The number of pieces of paper that go in should match the number of candidates for each office. For example, where there are 2 candidates for president, you'll use 2 pieces of paper. But if there are 3 candidates for vice president, you'll use 3 pieces of paper to draw for the VP position. You work your way down from president through the positions until you're finished. The example above is N16. If you have only slates, you'll place numbered pieces of paper in the container equal to the number of slates. In other words, if you have 2 slates, 2 pieces of paper. If you have 4 slates, 4 pieces of paper. It's a little more complicated where you have a combination of slates and individual candidates. With a combination, you determine the office with the largest number of candidates and place that many numbered pieces of paper in the container each time you draw. In other words, if there are 2 slates, but there are a total of 6 people running for the position of secretary, you'll place 6 pieces of paper in the container when you draw for president slates, so that the slate secretary candidates have the same chance of being last on the ballot as every other candidate for secretary. The example of this is N15 on the left-hand side of your slide. In a normal election cycle, there should be only two advantages to running on a slate: collecting one set of signatures in locals or units large enough to have petitioning, which obviously was not applicable in this election cycle due to the pandemic, and receiving a slate box on the ballot. There should not also be an advantage of position on the ballot for slates over individual candidates. This method of drawing for a combination between slates and individual candidates ensures that. So once you've determined the number of pieces of paper you need and the order in which the drawing will take place, you will instruct each candidate or representative of each slate or proxy to draw one of the numbered pieces of paper from the container in the proper order. If a candidate or slate is not present, or if you are conducting your drawing via Zoom or another electronic online means, an election committee member will draw on behalf of the candidate when it is that candidate's turn. Announce the number drawn each time, and remember that the number drawn by the slate representative or on behalf of the slate is the position for every member of the slate. After the drawing is complete, you'll send notice to each candidate of the results of the drawing and post the notice to the membership on bulletin boards, as well as to communicate it in whatever other means you're using this election cycle, such as email and electronic postings. Now that you know the placement of the candidates on the ballot, you'll need to prepare ballots, instructions, envelopes, notices, and logs before the election meeting. You'll need to draft the official ballot with or without slates. For that, you can reference M6 or M5, as well as challenge ballots, which you can look at Form M7, for those who show up at the election meeting but do not appear on your voter eligibility list, but insist they should be able to vote. The SEC recommends that you utilize the format shown in the examples in the materials. However, you may draft your own ballot, even with pen and paper if necessary, as long as it'll be understood by the members. You must identify the election, in other words, Mango County Local 00, Unit 0000 election. The names of the candidates must appear properly spelled in the order determined by drawing for position, and you must note any positions where the candidate is deemed elected unopposed. No voting box should appear beside the names of those candidates elected unopposed. In addition, where there are slates, you must have a row or column with the slate name and a separate box in which members can cast a vote for the entire slate with one mark, as well as separate boxes for voting next to the names of each candidate on the slate still to be elected. As far as voting instructions, there are samples for each type of election in your materials. Instructions appear on the back of each ballot type. The purpose of the instructions is to explain how members should mark the ballot in order to effectively vote for the candidates of their choosing. The procedure must be explained for voting, collecting, and counting the ballots, and slate voting instructions must be clear. In addition to the ballots and instructions themselves, you will need to create envelopes for challenge ballots and a voter registration log. Finally, you'll need to draft and post, email, mail, put out on social media, notices to the membership about the election meeting, which must be posted and distributed at least 5 days before the election. For that, you can reference M4. There are checklists in your materials, as well as samples of every document that you may use to plan and keep track. There are several things you'll need to do to get ready for the election meeting. There are checklists in the manual that you can follow. A few of the items are arranging for a location at which the meeting can take place. Keep in mind the size of the membership, as well as work locations and shifts, and pandemic considerations such as social distancing and limitations on indoor and outdoor gatherings. Prepare ballot boxes, draft and print the different ballot types and envelopes we discussed, and publicize the meeting. Let's start by looking at the meeting notice. As you can see, it indicates the time and place of the meeting, clearly stating the purpose is for the election of officers only. And it explains that a quorum of at least 25% of the membership eligible to vote must be present in order for the voting to take place. It also explains the right of candidates to be present and to observe each stage of the balloting and counting process. On this slide, you are looking at a draft ballot where there are no slates running for office. And on this slide, you are looking at a sample of ballots with slates. As you can see, in addition to the name of the candidates on the slates, there's an extra box with the slate name off to the left. A mark in that box is the same as a vote for each member of the slate. However, there must also be voting boxes within each name because members are permitted to vote across slates. In other words, they can vote for some positions on the first slate, for independent candidates, and for positions on the second slate as long as they only vote once for each office. This is a sample ballot to be used if a member comes to the meeting and is entitled to be present because he is a card-signed member on the date of the election, but for some reason their name does not appear on your voter eligibility list. Keep in mind this may be the result of a break in service, a break in dues payment, or becoming a member after April 1st of this year. Nevertheless, the proper procedure is to permit the person to fill out a ballot, but to mark it as a challenge ballot. We'll discuss how these are dealt with during the count as part of the next and final video in the training series. On this slide, you can see examples of the envelopes for challenge ballots, and on the right is a sample voter registration log. A final note on ballot design. Because an election at a meeting may ultimately result in mail balloting if an insufficient percentage of the membership shows up at 2 separately consecutively scheduled meetings, you'll need to be prepared to create envelopes for mail balloting. We'll cover that next time as well. Moving on to events and conduct between nomination and voting. As the chairperson, it is not your responsibility to direct or control the conduct of candidates during the campaigning period. However, you may be asked whether certain things are acceptable, and you may find yourself faced with protests that you must either answer or decide. In general, the information is available on the notice regarding campaigning that you posted and distributed back during the early stages of the election process, as well as in the candidate's handbook. The main bullet points are above. Use of the logo on campaign material is prohibited and implies the endorsement of a candidate by CSEA. Use of union and employer funds is not allowed. This means any employer. In other words, if a candidate's cousin owns a Kinko's, the cousin cannot offer to make free copies of flyers for the candidate. That is a use of employer funds. However, the activities of the election meeting chairperson are considered to be candidate neutral. This means that the local or unit or the employer may permit use of its offices, equipment, mailboxes, or communication systems for activities that further or support the election process itself. A current officer also is not permitted to use his or her position to obtain greater access to the membership for campaign purposes than any other candidate. Site visits by all candidates are governed by employer policy and practice. Election events, or meet the candidates events, are appropriate only if they're put on by the election meeting chairperson. If the chairperson is asked about campaigning or receives a protest and there are any questions about how to respond, please call the SEC. The chairperson's role is to ensure a fair, neutral, timely election. Meet the candidates and other similar events that locals and/or units arrange are encouraged because those opportunities lead to an informed membership. However, the following guidelines must be observed in order to avoid violating the election procedures as well as the law. That is, they must be sponsored by the meeting chairperson only. There has to be an opportunity for every candidate to participate and notice must be provided in a timely manner. In other words, you should contact the candidates before scheduling any events, and if they don't wish to participate, you might want to avoid holding one. Certainly you don't want to set one up regardless of the availability or some or all of the candidates, because that would lead to a legitimate protest. Of course, due to the pandemic, health concerns, restrictions on indoor and outdoor gatherings, and the need for social distancing will cause all of this to be handled a bit differently. You may use online resources such as Zoom, Teams, and other virtual gatherings. Thank you for your continued hard work. In the next video will be the final installment and we'll cover the day of election issues, counting, wrap-up, and protests.